Meeting is being recorded.
Hello, my name is Rich McMillan, and I work at the New York State Education Department. And today, this presentation will address the Perkins 5 program. The title of the presentation is Overview of Process Needed to Prepare CLNA Workbook Template. And I will share my screen and we will begin forthwith. The Perkins 5 data presentation overview of process needed to prepare CLNA workbook template. Introduction, obtaining special populations values. This presentation involves an overview of the preparation of values in response to the questions posed in the CLNA on Chart 7b titled Access and Equity. To perform the task outlined herein, you will need Microsoft Excel, your formatted CTA data in the Excel spreadsheet for upload. Also, you can download a copy of your previously uploaded data anytime using IDEX system, and internet access to obtain the non-traditional crosswalk table that will be necessary for some of the calculations. Chart 7b, Access and Equity Overview. This is a partial view of the form for illustration purposes only, just so you can see the title of the form. Title of the form is Chart 7b, Access and Equity. Now, special population categories that will be the subject of both the presentation and the Chart 7b are English learners, homeless individuals described in Section 725 of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, 42 U.S. Code 11434A, youth who are in or have aged out of the foster care system, youth with a parent who is a member of the armed forces and on active duty, individuals with disabilities, individuals from economically disadvantaged families, including low-income youth and adults, single parents, including single pregnant women, out of workforce individuals, finally, individuals preparing for non-traditional fields. Overview of process and procedure. This presentation is an overview of the process of calculating the needed rates to complete Chart 7b. Now, a much longer, detailed PowerPoint that I've created is available, and this is in detail describing the process and procedure in a step-by-step cookbook fashion. This document is quite frankly, it's too long and too complex for a presentation of this nature, but it will be provided to you for your review. If you need a step-by-step cookbook specification of the procedure, it will be provided. But again, this presentation is an overview effectively of that longer PowerPoint that can be used to dig deep into the procedure and its details. Okay, here is a screenshot of a portion of Chart 7b. It's a large chart, large document, and I cannot get it on the screen, so we won't be able to see the whole thing, but we're going to look at pieces of it and then discuss those in some detail. Chart 7b, Access and Equity Overview, partial view of form for illustration. So please, again, understand this is a partial view of the form, so I can talk about sections of the form without you not being able to see what I'm talking about because it's so tiny on the screen. If you notice over in the left column are the special populations. They're not all there because this is a tiny partial view of the form. The form's very long and has a lot of detail. Also notice in the second column is the enrollment rate, and in the third column is the completion rate. We're going to talk about those in some depth. CLNA Chart 7b, access and equity. Well, this form requests information on special populations. For example, English learners, the homeless, foster youth, individuals with disabilities, single parents, and individuals preparing for non-traditional fields. Rates are requested for both concentrators and completers, separated by program. An external table must be referenced to complete the section of the chart for individuals preparing for non-traditional fields. Program level data for special populations. Again, this is a partial view of the form for illustration purposes only so I can talk about the form a little bit before we see other parts. So again, if you notice at the top of this form, it says Chart 7b, access and equity. Notice that it is an Excel spreadsheet. You can see that by the columns with the A and the B and the C at the top. Note that the special populations are at the left, listed first with individuals with disabilities. Now, of course, keep in mind this is a partial view of the form. This is only just a little snapshot of a tiny part of the form for illustration purposes only. Now, but the column B has the enrollment rate, and it indicates identify by specific program. And then column C has completion rate, identified by specific program. So we get into a little bit of detail. An individual should only be included in enrollment data if they meet concentrator status. So effectively, the enrollment rate is the count of concentrators. Also, an individual meets the definition for more than one special population. Please include them in each category for which they qualify. So a student could be both homeless and an individual with disabilities. And you would count them in both categories. Two separate calculation groups. Calculations will be divided into two groups based on procedure for calculating. There'll be a total of 9 special populations to be calculated. The first 8 are in group 1. And in group 2, there is one item, students preparing for non-traditional fields, which requires the calculation of 2 rates and use of an external table. So group 1 calculations are all performed in the same way, and that will cover 8 of the 9 special populations categories. Group 2 consists of one item, students preparing for non-traditional fields, and that will round out the 9 special populations categories covered by the Chart 7b. Again, we're going to list the group 1 categories: individuals with disabilities, economically disadvantaged, single parent, out of workforce, English learners, homeless, youth foster care, youth parents in armed forces. And group 2 is non-traditional, students in non-traditional fields. Concentrators and completers groups and CTA 1 and CTA 2 groups. Separate calculations will be made for these subdivisions. CLNA 1 and CLNA 2 concentrators and completers. So a school with both CLNA 1 and CLNA 2 students will require 4 separate tables with concentrator and completer tables for inclusion on the CLNA 1 master table and the CLNA 2 master table. Concentrators and completers. Students must be either concentrators or completers. A concentrator for CLNA 1 is defined as having greater than or equal to 12 credit hours. And CLNA 2 must have greater than or equal to 100 contact hours. Or must be a completer, receives degrees or certificates of completion or professional licensure. You need 2 copies of data in Excel, one for concentrators and one for completers for each CLNA type. In Excel, call up spreadsheet and file save as spreadsheets. Name one ending in -concentrators. Name one ending in -completers. Overview of procedure steps. The first step uses Excel filters to create separate files for concentrators and completers. This is simply the separation of your student body, your CLNA student body, into concentrators and completers. So you have one file with all concentrators thereon and another file with only completers thereon. Next, reporters are given the choice of 2 separate methods to calculate the special population's rates using either Excel filters or Excel pivot tables. The filters method is easier than pivot tables, but also more prone to error. Excel filters method of calculation. The filters method is essentially a process of elimination. By first selecting the program using the zip code associated with it and filtering down to only students in that program, and then filtering the special population category under study, arriving at a set of all, for example, single parents in a particular program. This method is applied to the first 8 special population categories. For the 9th category, students preparing for non-traditional fields, an external table, the non-traditional crosswalk, is used to determine which programs are considered non-traditional for one gender. Now, the Group 2 process, which involves only the category non-traditional fields, the next steps are to, 1, determine if the program of study represented by the zip code is non-traditional, and if so, to next determine which gender is non-traditional, and then to count the number of students in that gender category to create the rate for non-traditional participation in that particular program represented by a zip code. Complete this process for each zip code, and we use a table from the internet to make these determinations, termed the non-traditional crosswalk. Here is the link provided. Now, this is a snip from the 2020 non-traditional crosswalk, which is what you should use and what is found on the website. It's the most current version. Over at the far left, you'll notice are the zip codes. And so these are the zip codes that identify the program. Notice it's a 6-digit number. Next, in column 2 of the non-traditional crosswalk, are the SIP title. And this would be actually the career description. For example, registered nursing. Now, over the third column is an example of an associated occupation for which the program prepares students. So you notice this first zip code in the row here, 51.3899, is associated with registered nurses. All right, let's look over to the right. We see 2 columns, female and male. Note that under the female column, there is an N for no. So women who enter the profession of registered nursing are not entering a non-traditional field. As a matter of fact, we could say that registered nursing is traditionally occupied by women. And we can tell, notice that in the next to the last column here, we've got percent female employed in 2019. And notice that we have 89% of those in the registered nursing occupation in 2019 were women. Only 11% were men. So note that under the male column, we have a Y. And that means, yes, registered nursing is a non-traditional field for men. Now notice that the second category, zip code 51.3901, licensed practical nursing, also is non-traditional for men. The Y is in here. So for example, if your zip code was 51.3899, you would count all the students at your school in that category. Could be concentrators, could be completers, but you'd count all of those students, and that would be your denominator, and then your numerator would be the number of men in that program. Now, I want to show you what you also might find as you look through this table. Let's go to the second set of programs. Again, we're looking at the same sort of columns, but note that the very first, actually, I'm going to use the fourth one that I've highlighted in yellow. It's a zip code 12.0502, and that's for bartending or bartenders. And this is a good explanation of how this chart works, because note that bartenders are not non-traditional in either gender. And keep in mind, the data systems that are still in existence here are binary pretty much in character, and that's based on history. Someday there may be more categories, obviously. So, but we notice here that it's bifurcated into male and female. And so notice that for bartenders, neither gender is non-traditional. And let's look over at these percentages. Look at that, 53% of all the bartenders employed in 2019 were women, and 47% were men. So very close. And so the decision was made that this is not a non-traditional occupation for either gender. Now let's move on down here to a master, a statistician up here at the top, 12.0414. 85% of people in that employment in 2019 were women. So as a result, the males are considered non-traditional. Only 14% of men were in that occupation. Only 14% of the people working in that field. So again, that is how to read this table. We'll move on. Pivot table, method of calculation. pivot table method uses Excel's tool for quickly building tables. If you have never used pivot tables before, you might want to stick with the filters method. Those familiar with pivot tables, this method is perhaps quicker and less prone to error. The pivot table method allows one to build a table very quickly using programs as rows. Zip codes represent programs, and special populations categories as columns. And a proficient operator could create one table. It would be a very busy one with almost all values for one Chart7b table. So this method is much faster than the filters method. Final issues and requirements. At the end of the process, rates are calculated for each program. For example, for each program, the rate of participation is determined as in one instance, as the number of non-traditional students, for example, count of 12, divided by the total number of students in that program, 65, for a rate of 18%. Rates are expressed as percentages. Summary and conclusion. In summary, this method using Excel to gain the values needed for CLNA Chart7b is a bit of effort, but it is a fairly simple process, mainly requiring concentration and focus during tedious manipulations. Specifically, if you decide to use the filter method, it will require many steps. They'll be fairly simple steps, but there will be many of them. You'll have to perform them in a specified order. The non-traditional participation calculation seems daunting, but is manageable by moving through it step by step. Performing many manipulations offers the risk of introducing error, and tedium is an enemy of accuracy. With two methods offered, the filtering method and the pivot table method, the data reporter should find one they feel comfortable using to calculate these needed values. And that's the conclusion of the presentation on CLNA preparation. Now, again, try to understand this is based on yet another document, a larger PowerPoint that will be posted and goes into extreme and perhaps excruciating detail in order to help you work through the procedure and gather up the correct data and calculate the proper values. So thank you very much. Again, my name is Richard McMillan, and please have a wonderful day. Thank you.